Come on,
Yeah,
don't shy away.
back in medical schools, this Diana Abbott's MP's initiative for sort of BAME groups, and I won a recognition basically for academic achievement. So that was nice. That was a nice cherry on top, really. But yeah.
Wow, that is amazing, guys. We love to see this sort of. We want to just celebrate you. We just want to say well done and congratulations. And
Thank you so much.
Keep it going. We need people. We need more people like you, like from our society community in that sort of field. It's just amazing to see, because if it wasn't for the Ghanaian nurse that helped me, I wouldn't be here interviewing you today, because she intervened into my my healthcare and made me better. So I want to just say thank you to you guys. You're doing an amazing job for NHS. So well done.
Thank you so much.
So we're talking about autoimmune diseases. So if you can tell us a bit, like, what is an autoimmune disease, please?
Yeah. So autoimmune diseases is basically sort of a term that's used to encompass a lot of different conditions.
Yeah.
So normally what happens is, how we're made is that when someone gets an infection or something foreign sort of enters the body,
yeah,
the body's got an immune system, and that normally fights the infection. So we've got systems in place that recognize that something's sort of foreign. So then you fight it, and then you fight an infection. You might get a fever, and then you just, things go down, and then the infection sort of goes away. Unfortunately, in conditions of autoimmune diseases, the body those systems in place kind of fail to work properly. So the body realizes sort of things in itself that normally are healthy, and starts to break them down as sort of foreign as well, which is unfortunate, but actually a massive burden, in the sense that these things can be very difficult to control, because it's difficult to sort of teach the body what's normal for the body and what's foreign from the body. Right. And so in those cases, when the body starts attacking its own cells and its own healthy cells, we call that autoimmune diseases.
Okay. So sorry, go on.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, so normally this is, so basically the definition of it, or like a summary of it, is a normal process gone wrong, where your body is sort of recognizing your own cells as foreign and destroying them.
Right, interesting. Okay, so going on about autoimmune disease, what would you say are the if you can name a few, what would you say are?
So autoimmune diseases, yeah, because it's an immune system, it can actually affect any part of the body, and normally we kind of classify it based on where it's affecting. So you can have generalized things like lupus, so systemic lupus erythematosus, which basically can affect any part of your body. You can get different forms of it affecting the kidneys, the brain, the muscles. You can get other things, so the central nervous system, as our sister just spoke to us about, Elaine, which was really, really inspirational, actually. Thank you so much for that story.
Yeah.
And hopefully be able to sort of delve deep into that in a second. So central nervous system being affected, that can cause MS. You can get your thyroid gland, which is sort of responsible for hormones. Then that can be too active, which is Graves', or too low, which is Hashimoto's. You can get your pancreas being affected as well. And when your pancreas gets infected, you get a process called diabetes. So actually, not many people know that diabetes can be autoimmune.
Wow.
But actually, diabetes can be autoimmune. There are different types of diabetes, but the type 1 diabetes, which is not necessarily related to sort of eating lots of fats or sugars, etc., that can be an autoimmune disease. And the other things that can affect your body as well is the bowels. So you can get inflammatory bowel disease. We've got Crohn's and colitis, and then in the musculoskeletal as well, so like rheumatoid and psoriasis. So there's lots of them, basically.
Wow. Do you know what? I'm not gonna lie. I thought I touched on all four of them last week. Obviously, I didn't. Wow. I'm learning, guys. Guys, are you learning? Because I'm learning. If you're learning, put learning in the comments, please. Let me know that you're learning something today, because I want to know that everyone is learning. Because, guys, if you haven't already, please share this platform. I can't say much anymore. Share. Knowledge is power, guys. This is great information. I'm even taking notes myself. This is actually amazing. So what kind of signs and symptoms can we look out for in, to prevent? Is there a way to prevent autoimmune disease, or, is it hereditary? Like, how do we prevent all this?
So, yeah, that's a really, really good question. So autoimmune diseases at the moment, unfortunately, we don't have a sort of specific thing that would say, if you don't do this, then, you won't get it or whatever, because it seems to, as Elaine alluded to earlier, it seems to kind of be an interaction between the environment and sort of genetics. Wow. So there are lots of sort of schools of thought, because we do find that actually in certain sort of genetic pools, it's more common. So for things like systemic lupus erythematosus or lupus, we know is more common in sort of the Black and African and Asian minority ethnics. And again, we sort of found that, you know, it's the sort of genes in that's clustered.
Yeah.
It's the genes that are clustered in that region. Those are the ones that are sort of more sort of representative in that pool or in that ethnic background. We've also noticed that specifically for multiple sclerosis, there's been lots of research actually to show that the further away from the equator, so this is like on the world map, so the further away from the center where the sun is sort of heavy and the sun, you know, like in the equatorial belts or tropical regions, the further north or south you go from that, the more common multiple sclerosis is. So there have been sort of schools of thought to suggest that maybe there might be some interplay with vitamin D, because the sun gives us vitamin D.
Okay.
And in places where there's less sun, for example, so when you go to the island, Norway, etc., Scandinavia, it's more common there. So it's sort of in the environment, it's kind of a mixture, and it's actually is a really complex sort of balance between all of them. They've also found that most people often sort of complain or develop these symptoms after a viral infection, for example. So often when you take a history from someone, they may or may not have had a viral infection in the past, and then these symptoms start to sort of manifest as well. So they wonder whether or not the virus actually triggers the immune system, and the immune system gets erratic. But there's lots of research at the moment, and there isn't a specific kind of cause, if you like.
Okay, but how is there a way for us to prevent it, or I mean, like eating?
So I think, yeah. So I mean, as with many things, so obviously with health, it's important to have a good generalized health. Make sure that you're having, obviously all of these are the cliche stuff that we always mention. So having a healthy, balanced diet, making sure you're having fruits and vegetables, because obviously with the vitamin D, for example, who's to know that there aren't other vitamins that are really important that we haven't discovered yet? And most importantly is to reduce stress, because often when people have been diagnosed, they notice that when they've got times when they've got high stress, the stress actually leads to flare-ups or makes their symptoms worse, or makes it more difficult to manage with the normal sort of medications that they normally take. So things like exercising, making sure that you're having, when you're cooking your food, using sort of natural cooking methods like boiling, steaming, baking, rather than sort of frying and grilling, which obviously reduces all these oxidants as well. So all of those are important. And obviously with exercise comes low BMI, because we've noticed that people with a higher BMI have an increased propensity to have sort of an erratic immunity or immune system. So that's important as well. And the thing with exercise as well is it helps with your mental health, because we know that what some of the manifestations of these autoimmune conditions is sort of mental health problems, which we can go into in a second. So all of these together, sort of good, healthy, balanced diet, exercise, and reducing stress, all seem to help.
Great. Hold on, I'm gonna read some comments now. People are really learning from this, which is really good.
I hope it's helpful for people to learn 100%. From it, because
1 second.
In our community, in the general community, often, I think Elaine mentioned something earlier, is that when people don't have an understanding about a specific illness, there's lots of stigma about it. And I think the best way to sort of dispel this stigma is to teach people about it and make them more receptive to it.
Yeah, and this is why I was so happy to jump on board and do this live with last week and today, because I just feel like our society have no idea. And looking at the questions and the comments people are making, people are now learning now. It's mad. But I'm going to read some questions. So I've got one saying from Bertha. Hold on, let me go back. Actually, Bertha says, what do you make of the idea that the BAME community is more susceptible to COVID?
That's a really interesting
thank you, Peprah.
Sort of finding that. Thank you so much for that question. Finding that we found one of the latest reports that's come out. So there's actually probably a lot of different things, multifactorial. I'll try and sort of break it down, but obviously all of these are speculation, and there hasn't been lots of research to sort of demonstrate any causative reason why. So there are lots of possible biological reasons. So we know that in the BAME community, there's a high prevalence of sort of hypertension, diabetes and obesity, so being overweight, not necessarily obese, but high BMI. And there have been lots of empirical evidence to show that actually people who get COVID do worse with these sort of medical backgrounds. So people who have hypertension, who normally take drugs to manage hypertension, people who have diabetes, all do worse when they get COVID. So that could be one reason why people are doing worse in the Black community with COVID when they get it. The other thing is the social stance as well. So when I was on the COVID ward, we found that there was a massive overrepresentation of people working in the NHS health sort of frontline, not necessarily doctors and nurses, but actually in our community there are lots of people who work as sort of auxiliary staff. So we've got people who are receptionists in the NHS, people who work as housekeepers on the NHS, porters, etc. And all of these people, you know, bus drivers and people who work in sort of retail shops, etc. These are people who are represented a lot in our community, in the BAME community, which means that they're more likely to get in contact with this virus, unfortunately, and then compounded with obviously the biological problem or the biological increased risk that basically amplifies it and makes them overrepresented. There are lots of things that they're trying to investigate as well to see whether or not, you know, there's any sort of genetic factors that might take play, but I mean, it's sort of early at the moment, in the early stages. So I hope that answers the question.
Oh, thank you very much for that answer. I have another question I got some questions before from other people that actually have MS, and one's from Natalie, and she said, as MS attacks the coating that protects the nerves, is it called myelin? Myelin, is that right? Myelin, yeah. Okay. Is there any MS research focusing on finding a treatment that can repair the damage to the myelin?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. So for people who don't know the background, so actually I can try and explain the pathophysiology a bit. So as our sister just mentioned, so my multiple sclerosis, the actual process that happens is, as you mentioned earlier, we've all got nerves, and our nerves are responsible for sort of passing information from one part of the body to the other. So it helps us move, helps us feel, helps us pass urine, helps us think. And all of these are nerves, and the nerves have a wrapping around them, which is a fat wrapping around them, which makes the movement of this information more effective. And what happens in multiple sclerosis is, because it's an autoimmune condition, the body's immune system starts to break down this wrapping around these nerves. And when it breaks down the wrapping around the nerves start to dysfunction, start to function in a wrong or erratic way.
Is that so it makes it less wobbly, like they can't get them?
Exactly. So it makes the nerves can't work properly. So if it's affecting a nerve that's going to a muscle, you get muscle weakness, like Elaine described earlier. You can get tingling and numbness and pain if it's affecting the sensory nerve. If it's affecting the central nervous system, you can get problems of cognition where you can't think. You get brain fog. You get other things like sort of epilepsy or seizure, not epilepsy in a sense, but seizures related to that condition, and lots of other things as well. So psychosis, dementia, all sorts. So it's basically kind of specific to what type of nerve is being affected. At the moment, there aren't any sort of treatments to sort of halt this process. The mainstay of the treatment for MS is to slow the process of inflammation, and then to reduce the sort of effects that it causes on the body. So when people get the pain, etc., muscle stiffness, there are lots of medications to reverse that. There's lots of research to also cause like immunosuppression to try and sort of teach the cells to not destroy these neurons. But at the moment, there's no sort of treatment to reverse it, because often what happens is after the nerves have been broken down, it gets replaced with scar tissue. And with scar tissue, it's almost very, very difficult for the body to remodel because it's basically virtually useless. So at the moment, there's no treatment to do that. But there's lots of studies for nerve regeneration. And hopefully, once we understand it a bit more, they can be sort of extrapolated to MS. I'm not sure.
David, I'm going to pause you there. Guys, I've got 1 minute remaining. I'm going to come back because I have a question for you, David. Do not go anywhere. Guys, please, I'm going to log off and come back. Come straight back, guys. Please come back. I'm going to log off now, guys. 1 second.